Can you make the metal a little bit more? There we go.
Nice.
Is that good? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's good.
All right, so I'm here today with Topher of Alphabet, one of the UAC portfolio companies, or I guess not portfolio companies, participant companies.
Yeah.
And so I thought today we could kind of get to know you and you could tell us a little bit more about the new project.
Sure.
But why don't we kind of start with explain how you got into Urbit and kind of how you got to the point where you were submitting to UAC and that kind of stuff.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thanks, Poldec. So yeah, my name's Topher Colby, and I'm currently a PhD student at Oxford.
In
classics. I study ancient Greek law, so I study the ramifications of musical patterns over time in tragedy, as well as 7th and 6th century poetry, in order to map those onto the Greek conceptions of aesthetics that they then use to argue for or against legal concepts, at least in particular in philosophy. And the reason why that's important is because I guess when I got to Urbit, it was never out of, I am not a dev. I'm also not I think, traditional founder, so to speak. I think I come at it with the desire to, perform something that can have a very meaningful impact on the world. And I guess the world in question here is sort of the Urbit ecosystem. So the Urbit ecosystem for me began with a bunch of people. I was in something at an undergrad called the John Adams Society at my undergrad institution. And a lot of my friends, they started companies and they had to do with Urbit for ideological reasons. And so I got into Urbit strictly because of belief points. And I think when you stake those belief points out and you take them to their furthest point, you arrive at certain questions that allow you to take certain stances on what you would want to see built. And so as it happens, Urbit is seeing some pretty watershed moments right now in how development is taking place. Just as much as they were able to put a clock on a screen in 2019, and they were able to distribute software in 2021. Soon people will start to trust Urbit with transactions, and you'll be able to program a variety of different things into your Urbit, and these things will get closer and closer to impacting people's daily lives. That's really
so. Let me stop you right there, because I think about your background, about what you're studying in particular. Because I have a question about this.
Sure.
I've had this discussion. I get the question a lot. Where we're at Assembly, we're in Lisbon. All these people flew here from all over the world. You go to that part, you go to the Halloween party, and you're like, what do any of these people have to do with one another? But if you're in it, it feels very cohesive. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel like it's kind of glued together. There's something that unites everybody. It's really hard to put into words. And so, as the person who, for some reason, I get this question a lot. I've been trying to find a satisfactory answer. It's not just and so one thing that I think the answer I've given, which I think is actually very similar to what you're studying, is that even at a technical level, a lot of the decisions made in designing Urbit are made for unabashedly aesthetic reasons. And so at the end of the day, we could talk about them, we could make them kind of sound pseudo-utilitarian, as technical people are wont to do. But at the end of the day, it's like, it comes down to, I like code that looks like this. I don't like my code to look like just, a blob of garbage. I prefer it to look, even though someone can prove to you that they're the same thing, right? This is completeness in general, right? Any code could be any other code. But the difference is the aesthetic, frankly, of one code, program over the other. And so it's one of those things where people, the fact that Urbit is, even just pure at the technical level, an aesthetic project, and unabashedly so. That tends to attract people who value aesthetics in other domains as well, right? Because if you're an artist, someone's like, prove to me that this is the best painting. It's like, what?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You'd have to, at the end of the day, fall back onto an aesthetic justification for your
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that attracts people who are, let's say, interested in aesthetics from all these domains,
Yeah.
right? And that could be the artistic domain, could be the political domain, could be the technical domain, et cetera. And so it's interesting, I think, and I feel like there's like a resonance here with what you're studying, which is that, there is an aesthetic justification for law in Greek history, right? Whereas we might at first blush think that makes no sense. There's no connection between these two things. But when you're arguing for the correctness of a law or the applicableness of a law or the expediency or something, you're making an appeal to something outside that, which can be, I think, and is aesthetics a lot of times. So I wonder if you think that's sort of like a similar relationship.
I would say you're tracking on to, I think, the root of most ideological considerations of the genealogical concerns for what we think is right and wrong.
Yeah.
And
is this gross or it's not gross? Right? It's
yes,
inelegant or it's elegant.
And I think it's formative. So I was talking to Tim last night and at this thing, and I looked around. And I said, what do you think everybody here has in common, right? And I think the first thing that most people have on Urbit in common is that they're very highly intellectual, or at least they're smart.
Yeah.
And then the second thing that they have in common is that they all believe they're doing the right thing. And I think that's very, very formative. That's very, very necessary to talk about. And the reason why is because I'm not a minimalist as far as thinking about what is right and wrong. I'm a maximalist as far as considering what is right and wrong. Because I think that if you're going to ask people to take a system and apply it to another system, for instance, take a language and equate it to another language and work with the hermeneutics therefrom, which hermeneutics is from the Greek word hermeneuein, which is to translate, right? So it's literally just the iteration of something into another form, right? If you're going to take a law, which is a certain prescription for a moment, and you're going to apply it to a descriptive thing of what's already happened, right? You're gonna have lots of instances that you have to process over time.
Yeah.
And lots of times these can be dirtier than they look on the forefront, and they will eat a lot of time very quickly.
Yeah.
And so you have to look forward, and you have to say what can we do, right? So what is the what is the poetics of this, right? What is the poiesis of what we can actually get done versus simply asking what is practical. Or at worst case, thinking what is just theoretical, which is theo rein, which is to observe. Anyway, we can get etymological for a long time, but basically, right now, if you consider what you have on Urbit, you have this superstructure, so to speak, of general ideas that people have on these aesthetic notions, and these general ideas that people have on aesthetic notions do not always align, and that's what creates these crazy conversations that you hear Urbiters talk about. I mean, it's wild. Just like the absolute variety of things that's going on here. It doesn't matter if you're interested in Urbit at all. Like you should be, if you chase a good conversation, right? If you want good interlocutors, like you should go to Urbit, right? I mean, that's step one. And a lot of people, from devs, interns, all the way to VCs, they get interested simply because of that. Yeah. Because I feel like there's some alpha there. Yeah. That you could bet on, hypothetically. Right. And so that has to be the starting ethical question of what you're doing here is does it have the internal conscious conversation enough to orient itself toward a greater good? Yeah. That should be the origin point for a lot of things that you consider in order to codify and think more prescriptively for your future self, law-wise, for instance, too.
Well, I think that's and I think that the relationship between code and law is even before it was a cliche, right? I mean, you're attempting to make a repeatable process, and that has social ramifications, right? So I mean, that's an obvious parallel that someone who's interested in law would be interested in, code or instantiations of code. But I think one thing you talked about as well is that the kinds of people that are on Urbit build Urbit, right? And so for other people that are and so I think a lot of times when people try to separate the technology from the group of people, it's it's kind of just it's impossible. It's you can kid yourself that such a thing is the case, and So it's kind of like, it's very important. And so it's interesting because I feel like I went to graduate school. I walked out before. At some point I was comparison pricing cans of beans. You know, I was like, oh, if I buy a damaged can of beans, and it's cheaper, and I was like, I'm too poor, and I can't be poor anymore.
Yeah.
So I left graduate school. But you know, I've had a lot of these debates, and
very relatable. Yeah.
I think one thing that I find interesting is, you know, it seems like kind of a snide grad schoolism to be like, oh, you know, who builds the code is very important, right? This is often used as a critique of Urbit, right?
Yeah.
But there's a grain of truth in that, of course, right? Because like whatever solutions to whatever problems, both the problems and the solutions for those problems are generated by a community of people.
Yes.
And so it's sort of like, if you find an interesting group of people like we have, that we're really very blessed to have, and I think it's like we should remember that. It's very not normal. We are going to come up with both different problems and different solutions. Right?
I talked about this in my assembly presentation, which was part of the UAC program, is that they give you 30 minutes of time on the assembly stage, and you can do whatever you want with it. And I spent the first 15 minutes basically talking about the relevance of this conversation, this general conversation that we're having. And how acts of consensus and acts of orientation toward or away from what you think is better or worse, right, track onto what is in the end possible from what you're building.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important because we are building we're not even building a prediction market, so to speak.
You're talking about Alphabet, your particular thing now. Not Urbit, but Alphabet.
So we, are building something that, strictly speaking, allows you to make a peer-to-peer bet between two people, which actually that sounds very simple. And it's also something that, the hermeneutics of a in-person bet versus the computer bet, right? I mean, they take the same mental energy, right? It's just a matter of like what the physical consequences are. And really, Urbit, solves those physical consequences answers, right? Which is that how is this easier than just doing it in person? Because you skip a lot of like technical problems, and you can like build up and see these massive information markets on a variety of different things that I could also get very into. But I guess the real point is that Urbit as a thing, as a general concept of people that are laboring within the umbrella of, is a coalition of product-oriented people that have in mind very basic primitive concepts that they want to see realized, and they can do it very quickly.
Yeah.
And that's why Urbit teams are so small, and yet they get so much done. And yet when you actually see what they got done, you're like, wow, that's actually really simple.
Yeah.
It's because in reality, these things don't have to be very complicated. They shouldn't be very complicated, right? And I think you have this sort of like existential recoil from realizing that computing shouldn't be so complicated, right? Absolutely. You're like, oh my gosh, we have been, the mountain made out of the molehill has gotten to be so egregious, right, that we almost can't imagine, saying goodbye to this happy community we have here. And it's like, well, what about, all these people that love to do things with computers? It's like, well, as somebody, I like to read books. I don't like to use technology. I don't like to use my phone. I don't like to, it's like, it's hard for me. It's like, this is great. You know what I mean? Like, I'm looking forward to the day when we're done with keyboards again, right? Yeah. The keyboard won't be here forever, right? Yeah. And a lot of things won't be here forever. When you look at the transience of information and the stability of the technology that we have right now, right, it's actually moving very, very quickly down and away, right? Yeah. It's not moving up and higher and closer to the things that we would approach as objects of permanence. So these permanent ideas and sets of forms of ideas. It's not always on the tips of people's tongues, because a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the communal understanding of the higher level concepts that motivate Urbiters are often things that you can justify in much more easily approachable strata that people find themselves approaching, whether it's like politics or certain people that like to read or whatever. But really, the audience here is still strictly technical, so you don't have a lot of philosophers in the room talking about truly,
more than most tech.
Right,
maybe.
Right. Yeah. Well, so that's the thing, right? Is that you introduce these concepts, and it's like, these people are professionals. I mean, they're very smart, they're very talented. They do things, right? Yeah. And they do things with this intellectual conversation in the background, right? which is so different than everywhere else. Well, it was never even in the question.
Yeah.
And you were always hoping that the person that was directing the whole thing was the one that like really had these, ideas and composures organized. And the end conclusion to looking in the world around us is that these end conclusions and these people that have been leading us and these ideas that we've been motivated behind and the systems that we are composed of that have been encouraging us to do things have not been really aligned for beautiful things.
Yeah.
They have not been very aligned for aesthetically rewarding things for the human spirit. They have not really edged us closer to something that resembles a very finite, believable, interiorly investable, and like understandable sense of the good.
Yeah.
It just hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And I don't think to myself every morning like, oh, like I'm getting closer to making the platonic form of the good up here on Urbit, right? Like I mean that's not necessary, but then again, I particularly, this is a metaphor we use for solving the Oracle problem on Alphabet, which is that like look like. The Oracle is a somewhere concept where, the Oracle has seen something happen, right? But in reality, what they've seen is a divination, right?
Yeah.
So that is what's actually seen. And the divination is not visible to everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you also have to deal with the fact that, you're basically giving a lot of people in the Urbit community, like the ability to like make decisions on what is seen, right? Like what this like idea of good is.
Yeah.
And some of these things are very cavalier, right? And once you give people that appetite to like take a strong moral position on whatever they're doing that aligns with an aesthetic vision for how they see themselves or how they see the world around them, whether it's them, their children, or their communities, right? Like that's when things really get highly motivated, right? That's when things really start.
So tie that in. So Alphabet at its most basic is a prediction market.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
so tie that in. Yeah. So you know what I mean? Like explain how that informs what Alphabet specifically is built.
Yeah. Alphabet at its most core functionality is a business that generates revenue. And our core functionality for generating revenue is allowing you to agree or disagree with a friend on a certain subject and tie money to that.
Okay.
Now, the reason why I don't say bet is because bet doesn't really apply for most of the things that you make disagreements on with other people, right? And the reason why I don't often say prediction market is because prediction market is an excellent thing to offer as a first step realization of the encomium of, congratulations we can give ourselves when everybody is given voice.
Yeah.
Because the more people you give voice on something, I mean, this is just the wisdom of the crowd, like, and just articles of consensus, right? Like the closer you get to a certain fundament of truth.
Yeah.
And that's not always true, but it's at least true for how many marbles are in the jar. It's at least true for who should get, who should get elected. That's why we have democracy. It's at least true for, what should we order at the restaurant? Everybody's like, okay, are we all okay with naan instead of rice on the side of the Indian food that we ate 3 hours ago? You know what I mean? So there's a variety of ways in which we agree on things, right?
Yeah.
And there's a variety of ways in which it's necessary to agree on things, and just there are fun ways to agree on things and new ways, right? And Alphabet allows you to do that. But there's, and these would be like the prediction market things. Like for instance, we had a sad case of an Urbiter who, is no doubt on deathbed because, he went to the ocean to swim in the ocean because he wanted to win that proposition of him swimming in the ocean. What you're really looking at here is like the ability to make a market.
Yeah.
And markets are infinitely variable. Because a market is nothing more than, a difference between two things that must be resolved with a decision.
Yeah.
And people are not very good at making decisions.
Yeah.
People don't like making decisions, right? So the easiest way to get somebody to not give you their opinion is to ask them their opinion.
Yeah.
And then the second hardest way to get somebody's opinion, it's a little easier than just straight up asking them, is to say, this is what Anthony thinks. Tell me why he's wrong, right? And then they might be willing to correct, right? And then the third stage is asking them what they've already decided, or more effectively, showing them what they've already decided, right?
Okay.
And the reason why this is such a big deal is because there are aspects of prediction markets that start at stage one, which is, these would be the initial liquidity providers on a question, right?
Yeah.
That's really hard to do, and people claim to solve it, but in reality, it's really, really difficult to get that. There's only so many decisive people in the world. It's why
the first people who say it's going to rain on Tuesday. This is the people. Okay.
Yeah, and look, like 1% of people are writers, 99% of people are readers.
Yeah.
Right. So turning that 1% into the 100% is not going to happen, right? So then you get to stage 2, which is, okay, there's already liquidity on a question, right? So now we can say, okay, now that we've primaried like certain people, let's get everybody in on like a few very like much more set questions that they can like make edits on that we've already like predetermined would be an effective model for saying this. And then the tertiary sense is, let's think of what are the things that people already make decisions on today that can be applied to markets in the future.
Okay, so give me an example of that third one.
So an example of that third one is, I like to offer one thing I mentioned in my presentation is that, the desire path, right? So the concept of desire path is that, you have a nice green field, like, I went to Dartmouth for 1 year. You have this, the green as it's called, and you look at the green from the satellite image, and there's like, weird crisscrossing paths, right? And it's really important where those crisscrossing paths are. It's not just one X through the whole thing, right? It's a series of weird, like, orthogonal like placements going to and from certain buildings. It's because they've realized that people like to take certain paths over others. They don't want them walking on the grass. So you have to make people's paths that they want to walk on walkable, right? So desire path is, instead of doing any paving on any street, on any walk paths, you just let people walk and you figure out where you should pave. Right?
Got it. Okay.
And so that's a quick example of like, look, like nobody wants to stop at the end of their walk in the day and say, okay, this is where I walked, right? But hypothetically...
This is the revealed preference. Basically.
Yeah, but hypothetically, if you could in a secure way, like, reveal people's preferences for certain things that they wouldn't feel uncomfortable revealing, right? Then you could allow people to, make preferential actions. And in a way, we already do this, right? So this is why there are recommendations on websites, right? This is why there are, plugs for certain things and other things. This is why, you see certain people on dating apps and other people don't see, certain people on dating apps. And there are like I said, everything is a market. It's just asking how easily accessible that market is to the people that are the voters in the markets, the people that have the information.
Let me restate that and make sure I understood it. So basically, you have these 3 kind of levels of market participants for statements, really, right?
Offering information.
Offering information. The first is someone who's saying, I think this will happen in the future. Right? So, because stuff in the past is we don't need to think about that. So someone just goes, I think it's going to bet on Tuesday. I think it's going to rain on Tuesday, and then other people can agree. And the second one, and a very small amount of your user base, right, to speak about an app, is going to be doing that. Right. The second order is like, well, I'm going to say agree or disagree with the person who's already made the statement. And then the third would be something where, I'm trying to think of an example where it's sort of like you just see how many people have listened to a song on YouTube. Right? It's like you're just they're doing what they're doing. They're revealing their statement through their actions, and they don't have to exteriorize it.
So I mean, like a lot of musical artists have started to do this, right? So you don't lead with the single, right? And the single gets a music video these days. You just drop the whole album, and then they will show you that the 9th track is the best one out of 13. It's not the second one, right? And then you drop that music video first, right? You make a video for every single song these days. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So like you basically, and you said it has nothing to do with the past, but actually it's a very compelling thing to note is that actually voting on what happened in the past is very interesting. Because then you can say. You can collect, you don't have to have stakes on this, right? But you can say, what is the sentiment on a certain thing? Like, was it right or wrong, right, for this thing to be priced at this price, right? And like, look, like people have already done it, but like they can give you your feedback and you can apply that for the future too.
Interesting.
And you can and you can see that, occurring in a variety of different ways. But I guess big picture wise, everybody can, take time and Google prediction market and see why rationalist folk or, VCs or why, some, mathematicians, they love prediction markets. That's pretty readily available. But as far as why it's relevant on a deeper level for Urbit, it's relevant because the accrual and distribution of information that it can be used to apply to markets has never been accessible through technology.
Okay.
So technology has always gotten closer and closer to us. And yet the closer it's gotten to us, the more uncomfortable we are with it being near us. I think that is a strong general sentiment, right? The desire to have the Alexa speaker that doesn't hook up to the internet has never been stronger, right? The desire to have a phone that doesn't talk about what your friends were talking about 2 days ago in the car has never been stronger. And the distrust of the ability for these technological means to undertake has also never been higher.
Yeah. But one thing I'd like to say about that is that there is, even just on a purely, let's say, information market point of view, there is a chilling effect that happens, right? It's like if you know that you're being watched, you act a certain way. So it's not even just like purely like, it's neither purely an aesthetic or like a moral issue. It's actually also like an information quality issue. Yeah. Because if you have a feedback loop where people are know they're being observed and they sort of like start to over kind of fit to that, then it can affect the quality of the information.
Yeah, it's very much like in Thucydides, where he talks about the debate. They had this island that was revolting, and they had the Greeks anyway, and they had to send a ship out by the end of the day, right, in order to deliver the message of, I think it was the Mytilenean debate, whether or not to slaughter the people on the island. Yeah, and not just whether to slaughter the people, but everybody. Just the men, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. Because that's just what you do. You have these island colonies, and it's tough because some of these things are necessary decisions, right? Yeah. There are necessary decisions that we have to come up with. The necessary decisions that they had to come up with in debate, right? Well, they ended up getting lucky because the boat. They sent the boat first, and then they were like, shoot, like we made the wrong decision. And then they sent another boat, and luckily the first boat showed up, and they saved the 10,000 lives. Yeah. This literally this entire population, right? And I'm not saying that whether or not you like Fanta versus Sunkist is exactly of the same is indexed the same way of importance, but it's important to remember that the difference between a fun prediction market and a serious innovation in how we process markets and how we process information is going to be the ability to map decision-making onto necessary choices. Okay. So necessary choices must be made honestly. Yeah. A good fiat for this is money. Yeah. So you say you have one thing, but in reality you think the other way. Prediction markets are a cure for virtue signaling. So okay, you say you think that this is true, but you're not willing to bet money on it, that sort of thing. In fact, oftentimes, the more willing people are to say that they're going to bet money on something is actually the more informed they are that the opposite way is actually true, and they've been using the weight of saying I'm going to bet money on it to hedge their position. Yeah. So basically, you have to have some way to make people honest. Literally just asking people if they're being honest is not good enough. That's why looking in the past and accruing information that people have to make is so important. Interesting. That is why, when we update the population count of states and the population of Texas goes up and the population of Florida goes up, population of New York goes down and the population of California goes down, right? The collective market for the installation of representatives in the House of Representatives reflects that, right? Yeah. It reflects a necessary choice that people had to make. I mean, they weren't kidding when they left, when they voted with their feet, right? And so being able to access the conscription of data into markets and new markets is not just a task that is easier on Urbit because we have the functionality to make a basic prediction market possible, right? Because the fact that we do not actually run the prediction market, right? So we simply ship the software that allows you to make bets between other people. And it's totally distributed to everybody involved. We do not make any bets. Well, actually, we make some bets against each other, right, for fun, right? But we do not make any bets ourselves. We do not make any markets ourselves, and we are not privy to these things, nor do we want to be, right? Yeah. It's just it becomes a much higher question to ask. What are people going to come up with? Mm-hmm. You can finally trust your computer again to do computer stuff. To do technological spooky stuff that you can't go through all the code and figure it out. You can't even go through all the languages to make an objective choice. You have to trust people to some extent. Yeah. Reputation is invaluable. Yeah. Trust is going to be the premium of the next 5 to 10 years. This is going to be wait to see it happen on Urbit.
So this is kind of like where the Urbit tie-in is, right? Is that the persistent pseudonymous identity allows you to have some measure. I mean, even just informally, it already exists, right? Like I am poldec-tonteg. Anything I say on the network will be held against me, type thing. Yeah. And then so that's there is already a reputation system. It's just kind of like an ad hoc representation. Yeah. And can't really scale past a certain level.
Yeah.
And so is the idea that unlock, it changes kind of how one would do prediction markets, is by having that pseudonymous, persistent pseudonymous identity across different, what's the term, statements that one has made.
Yeah.
Right. You can see what's happened, and you can see how they've bet without even knowing who they are.
Yeah.
Right. Is that kind of what you're saying, that like that is actually what changes the type of prediction market one could even do?
Yeah, yeah, because you can make a prediction market in a variety of productive ways that has nothing to do with other people.
Yeah.
So you can make a prediction market against yourself. Will Anthony hit 10,000 steps today, tomorrow, and 30 days in the future?
Yeah.
Right. That's a really important question because that has real consequences for a variety of things. I personally wouldn't feel comfortable, and I don't. I'm sure they take it anyway, but I don't feel comfortable sharing my health data, right?
Yeah.
Like my steps and where I go. But like, I don't feel comfortable sharing that or like having it like in a position where people can analyze it without my consent. But like, I mean, now that it's on Urbit, right? Like, I mean, this thing, like, you could literally make a device that like just like does not have a port to the internet,
yeah.
right? And like allows you to like collect information like this and like have it be encrypted and like used on your Urbit, right? And like you're basically like asking yourself, like, we have conditioned ourselves to be so recalcitrant toward the ability to make these markets and the collection of information that we have sort of created these ad hoc primitives of reputation in order to get around how it is, at least from the people to people perspective. And you can also do deeper things too. You can get into stuff like reputation staking, and you can also start to think about how exactly you accrue trustworthiness as an oracle on the platform too, right? There's so many different ways in which you can innovate with this product on Urbit. It's almost overwhelming, right? Like how much potential there is and how obvious it is that it has to be on Urbit.
So that was what I was going to come to, is because the oracle question is a very basic question, right? Which is you have a computer a network representation of a statement, and you have to map that onto a off-network event statement. And the way that you do that traditionally is some oracle of some kind, right? Yeah. Which involves trust, it involves all the other problems. So explain to me how you guys are sort of approaching the oracle issue.
Yeah, so right now we're approaching the oracle issue by utilizing the completely reversed attitude we have for building a prediction market, which is actually instead of asking where is trust needed the most, we actually ask where trust is needed the least. So, right, I gave you the atomic example of you and you alone, right? You can make a bet against yourself on alphabet, right? It's pretty fun. Don't get me wrong. But you can also ask one person a question. And if you asked me a question, well, we don't see each other that much, but we will run into each other again, and we have lots of people in common that we know. And so we're probably not going to rip each other off. Yeah, exactly. Basically. So that is the least amount of trust. And then maybe we add in somebody who's works at the Urbit Foundation and they're a little sketchy. Maybe it's not quite as trustworthy as these two people in the room. Anyway, okay, so you get a little less. But what if you're talking about a company, right? Like a company, nobody's going to run away with the company, prediction market outcomes, right? Yeah. And companies build prediction markets all the time, right? Facebook has built a prediction market. Google built a internal prediction market
for estimating engineering times a lot of times.
Yes, and a bunch of other random stuff too, right? But the CIA is allowed to use prediction markets, right? But they are not allowed to cite them in their reports, which I think is very telling, right? Because you got to chew on that for a little bit. But anyway, the thesis is that we think that reputation will be very important, and from a ground level perspective, yes, if we made it so in order to run the Oracle API that sources to a data point on the internet, right, that you had to have a star first of all. And then in order to, have your star's reputation, you would have to go 2 weeks with constantly supplying the API effectively. Okay. Because the APIs change, right? So it might go down, right? But users want to immediately know when the Oracle is down, so that they will be told you can't use this Oracle is now bad, right? Or maybe the person who's maintaining that Oracle and getting money for running that Oracle, right, is okay, well, I have moved on to it. I no longer develop the Oracle API for how many tomatoes Estonia consumes, right? So this is no longer relevant to us. Basically, you can see reputation cropping up in a variety of different ways. If you literally stick to the functionality that all prediction markets have failed to access, right, which is even the low trust scenarios, right, you can solve the Oracle problem by admitting, first of all, that no Oracle is ever going to be perfect.
Yeah.
But also being willing to accept that, when you find a happy medium, right, which is the consequences of the trust systems that we already have in place, that will suffice for, group betting. And then later on, right, you can grab your reputation staking with the Urbit namespace, and you can have these oracles run like this, and, you can have people pay to resolve bets, and, you can have, disputation mechanisms that run off certain like governance platforms, right? You can get into a big maze of things, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, and this has been something that's remarked, we have a few hundred users, and most of them that we talk to, they all say that, look, they care about certain funny big markets, but at the end of the day, like the reason why this is useful for them is because it can be isolated to a fun part of their general group that they already have, right?
Yeah.
And if you already have a group, then you already have an oracle.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
you don't solve. You use you use reputation to solve the.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you basically have to ask. Well, it's like okay, somebody said the reputation word. Okay, like this is a good question. Urbit does solve this, strictly speaking. Yeah. But go find me the places in the world where we really feel reputation is very high, right? Where are the places that we trust?
The smallest group possible.
Yeah, probably. And I mean, you would probably want to start with your small groups and go up from there, which is why Alphabet as a market, certainly, once we, start making money, it will be, we will have basic global bets, it's like every other prediction market in order to make money, right?
Yeah.
But really the accessibility and the future of prediction markets needs to enfranchise the actual social structures that need information accrual.
Yeah.
And those have nothing to do with complex Oracle systems.
Exactly.
There is no one Oracle solution. Like I said, even the mythical Oracle was never actually the Oracle, right? So, when Plutarch has this, rhetorical debate in the 1st century AD of why did the Pythian Oracle stop giving out answers, right? Because at a certain point, the Pythian Oracle is literally a girl, of the girl class that lived in the temple that they were like, you give the answers, right?
Yeah.
Why did she stop? Is the fact that she stopped giving out the truth mean that there is no more truth anymore? Okay, well, you can go read the Latin, Plutarch is kind of a funny guy, but anyway, it's almost comical, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, of course the Oracle hasn't been deciding all the truth, right? Water is still wet, and the sun still shines, right? That sort of thing. So it's where are our processes of truth?
It's interesting because I think that there's a parallel here with where we started, which is that if your community or the aesthetic of your community is prejudiced towards, well, any answer has to be complicated.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of technical people kind of end up, whether they say it or not, that is a higher value thing. Meaning people want to see a lot of writing on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
They don't want to see some simple shit here.
Mm-hmm.
But that's ultimately a prejudice of your community, of the aesthetic standards that you hold your decisions up to.
Yeah.
And that's I think what drives a lot of the overcomplication of these things, is that there's a conception that somehow things working at basically unrealistic scales is the measure of them working.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's a prejudice that it's not a technical prejudice, it's a prejudice that comes from outside the technical arena.
Yeah.
Because the best Oracle is the one that works and makes the bets, makes the market work. It actually doesn't matter a priori how it's done.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's interesting that that's more accessible to you if your community is has these things, has these kind of preconceptions in it.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, so you're right. So the quick and practical answer to what you're saying is that basically one of our peers, Manifold Markets, the person who starts the market is the person who resolves the market.
Yeah.
Right. And you know what? That actually works pretty well.
Yeah, it's
right?
not that bad, honestly.
Yeah, and you can designate any oracle to be the oracle on Alphabet, right? Or any user to be the oracle, or the resolver on Alphabet. But you can see different complicated ways in which this is going to happen. But I think before you ask yourself, can we totally redesign how oracles work? you have to first consider that there is a fundamental misconception in how reputation is thought of.
Yeah.
So I think if you do that, and we think very deeply here, at Alphabet, then you can start to arrive at those points. But I think it's worth mentioning too that the market that we're building is not simply something that is going to allow you to transact money on an idea that you have an answer need for, right, among friends, right? It's rather going to be a performance of something that has been existing for a long time in order to frame what exactly is valuable about having hope for technology in the future, which is a lot of the time how I define Urbit. Okay. Urbit is hope for technology in the future,
it's
right?
True, yeah.
And I think one way to frame that is to say, let's put aside the future. What are the things that have existed for 10,000 years, right, and are not going to go away for another 10,000 years? Or rather, what are the things that have existed for 10,000 years, but now with the advent of technology, we don't feel comfortable doing anymore, right?
Yeah.
And now those lead you to a variety of disputations on the consequences of our modern period. But like one of those things has to be truth-finding mechanisms.
Yeah.
And I think that every event now that happens that gets put on Twitter is a great example of this. It's just like fake everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And all faces are now fake. All communications are now fake, right? Yeah. And it's like nobody knows what's real anymore. Yeah. And frankly, like this isn't there's no reason to know what is real anymore, right? And it's
kind of like a weird interregnum that people trusted it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that was odd in retrospect, I think. That people like watch the news like, well, that's it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That was an odd period.
Yeah. And I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, which is that even though the old internet, as I would put it, before our real collapse in trust has happened in the last 2 years and 3 years, with these evolutions of, AI and in general, just the dispositive display of absolute, flooding of poor information in space, right? Like, even though in the former internet, everybody was getting to the point where they hated each other instead of loved each other, right? Like, you still counted on the voices there being real, right? And you still trusted there to be discourse, right? The right to discourse was still there. The right to making a rational argument was there, even though the odds that you're making against the troll is getting higher and higher, right? You know what I mean? And then you eventually look in the mirror and you're like, wait a minute, like maybe I am.
Am I the troll?
Exactly. Like I have refined my ability to, as quickly as possible, like, punch people in the face internet-wise until they agree with what I say. And it's just like, you have to admit that, it's not that the internet, wasn't fun anymore. We were clearly okay with it being this like horrible place, right? It's actually that, we were at least in a horrible place together. Right. And like now it's like, well, it's not fun anymore.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's not fun anymore. Right.
Yeah,
it's like when you go to a concert and it's cold outside and it's raining. Or, I remember, the last NFL game I went to was like, it was a Patriots playoff game. And like we had to, we just spent like, $200 on the Uber because we were in Cambridge, and I spent $200 on Uber from our, Harvard dorm to like, with Foxborough, right? You get to Foxborough and like my friend is freezing so badly he has to buy like a $65 Patriots hoodie, you know what I mean, like at like the stand, which I think is actually the real reason why they sell them at football games. It's just because people are so cold, you know what I mean? And then like, you're just struggling. It's windy. It's literally snowing. You know what I mean? You're dying out there, right? But it's still kind of fun, right?
Yeah,
it's still kind of fun because we're at least experiences like the spectatorship together.
Yeah.
And that's really that. I mean, that's why people say that Urbit is such a breath of fresh air. Is because you come here and that problem hasn't elapsed yet. Not only has that problem not taken place yet, but it's still before it even got horrible, right? Exactly. You know what I mean? So it is still at the point where everybody here is like, once again, very smart and really passionate about doing the right thing. That is priceless, right? You can't set a value on that. If you wanted to make a market on that, you could, but I don't know. Like it's just like this is stuff that actually I think reaches more to the core of who we are as humans, and we clearly have a deeper version of ourselves, our cumulative social selves that desires to have this interaction and this truth-seeking behavior with others.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and you could get into some deeper thoughts as to why we like to find the truth.
Well, let's not. I think we've already
right. But like as opposed, well, some people like to find what's false, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not a scientist, so it's like but like what matters is that here we have an opportunity to not only take a breath of fresh air, but now you have stepped into clean water once again. The sun is again shining. The clouds have dispersed, right? And now you have to ask yourself, like, okay, we're at the beach, we're having a good time. Like, what would I like to do on the beach with my friends, right? Yeah. And one of the things that people like to do on the beach with their friends is they like to use prediction markets. Just kidding. No,
that's good. I think that like I agree with all that, and I think we gotta wrap up because this has been a great conversation, though. But I agree with everything that you've been saying here, and I think that I'm really excited to see what Alphabet comes up with.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of want to know so to wrap it up for everybody at home, what's the best way to sort of keep up with give me like a very quick where it's at and how to find out more.
Yeah, so Alphabet does not have a website. Alphabet is distributed through Urbit. You can find it attached to our very nice planet, midbet-dopdev.
Good.
So it's vanity planet.
There you go.
midbet-DEV. That's where our app is shipped from. And hopefully you'll also start seeing our app on literally every other Urbit app.
Yeah.
That is one thing. We are on Urbit, right? But we're on Urbit together, and we're very fortunate that here at Assembly, Talon has shouted us out, Tyrell has shouted us out, and Josh in his opening speech for the whole thing shouted us out. Like, we feel very embedded here, and we hope that we're the reason why people come to Urbit, and we're the reason why it keeps getting better. And we hope that you're the reason why our app crashes, so that we can figure out how to best build that for you.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much. This is a great conversation.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Boom.